really ingrained and incorporated into their into their lives. And so great, that's what's going on, but what the heck should we be doing about it? There are a handful of different resources I use. These are 3 of them that I found really important and really fed off each other. Know, Be, Live from the Impact Institute, Growing with Steve and Kara, and then Handing Down the Faith with Christian Smith and Amy. These 3 resources really talk about how parents can do a great job at building relationships with their teenagers, specifically using warm and authoritative parenting. So being supportive and helping them and guiding them through their life while also giving them boundaries, which is great things. That should be going on, but clearly it's not enough because we've already been doing it and teenagers still just have a belief, not a faith. And so it just drives me nuts. So part of what I found is this theology of place sharing, right? And Growing With is a great example of how secularization has happened and how place sharing will kind of help fit the pieces back together. Growing With has 4 parts, and on the 3rd part, they finally get to faithing and this conversation of God and faith, a part of the whole relationship of parenting. But why should it only be part 3, right? It should be continual conversations throughout all of it, especially in talking about being a Christian parent wanting to pass on a faith to teenagers. So I want to say we need to be in place sharing relationships as parents with our teenagers. And this is the what ought to be going on and part of the what's next. So this includes having warm, authoritative parenting relationships with your teenagers, or Growing With, as some of those books, right? And that resource that Steve and Kara had wrote about in terms of walking alongside your youth, being supportive, having those conversations. But place sharing is about more, right? Place sharing is about modeling and talking about God throughout each piece of life so that teenagers can see Jesus is real and is present and does care about things and is more than just Sunday mornings. To be able to have those conversations with your teenagers and being able to doubt with them and navigate those doubts, and also navigating disagreements, right? Whether it is with faith or with something else, being able to sit in that turmoil with them instead of just walking away and say, oh, that's your belief. Being able to have this mutual journey with each other, which Growing With uses, but in a way that creates a Christian framework, which is what place sharing does, using this example of Jesus, who did the exact thing of place share, right? Walking alongside humanity, walking alongside humanity and being able to place share, understand our pain, understand our sorrow, and ultimately understand death, right? And place share in the sorrows and in the joys of humanity. Using that understanding of Jesus as that example as parents to be able to do that for our teenagers and model that Christian framework for our lives will create a passing on of faith instead of a belief in God. Will create a foundation and a Christian framework for young people, teenagers specifically, to grasp onto and help build their morals and values and inform who they are as a person. One thing that's important to note, I chose teenagers because a lot of the research shows that the time of teenage years is when teenagers decide what they're going to be, right? Are they going to be Christian? Are they going to check that box, or are they still navigating it? Or are they just going to step away altogether? That time is especially important. So parents doing this in the teenage years will help solidify the fact that God cares, Jesus cares, and so do these relationships, like with your parents or church workers. So teenagers, place sharing, parenting with teenagers is especially important for passing on the faith. Mostly focused on Christian parents. So I think that's one of the future and challenges is what does this mean for non-Christian parents, or even parents that don't find their way into churches, right? I could use this a lot with the parents that I work with, but they've already found their way into a religious space, right? Into a relationship with someone who wants to support them. So what does it look like for somebody who doesn't have that, and teaching them how to place share? This might be terrifying to a lot of parents who have not had theological backgrounds. So, how do we do this with parents? Well, parenthood doesn't come with a manual, as most of you probably know. So, neither does place sharing, right? I think that's the important thing that we need to note. Just because I'm theologically trained and someone else isn't, doesn't mean that we're on different playing fields. There's not a manual for this. My kid is different than your kid. All of the adventures and journeys and experiences are different. I can't give you a manual to play share. I can just give you the example of Jesus and say, how can we model this for our young people? I'm done.
Yay, well done. Well done. Kelsey, I love the idea of play sharing and we like Andy Root. Andy's a good guy. He's a protagonist most days, but loves to be that and puts out some good stuff. So yeah, well done with that. And I love the idea of place sharing in the framework of faithing as parents. So I wonder, feel free to jump in and share for the next 5 minutes.
Kelsey, I was just wondering, I can't remember seeing your bibliography. Have you heard of the book What Parents Want? I think Bianca might know. Okay. I was gonna say it's pretty split orange. So it just gives a helpful list for both parents who are Christian and research on parents who wouldn't identify with the faith. So that's awesome. I love it. It's a great idea. Excited for you.
Yeah, I really like this. I think there's a growing interest for parents that are a part of the faith, like at least at our church, who have gone through youth ministry experiences in the past, have great memories, and are now looking for a place for their kids to grow in their faith. So I'm definitely going to check out your bibliography and that book as well. I wondered about, so I think as parents, we can do our best. And yet I think what students are experiencing in our current day and age, where the scriptures are written to a lot of people who needed God in a lot of ways for their daily needs. And there's just this growing level of contentment that is so hard to fight against and to help students understand, even though they have like basically all of their needs met, that they still need Jesus. So I was just wondering, maybe something further to think about is like, I wonder about the contentment and the quote unquote not needing God and how that plays into how a student receives, and how parents in the midst of play sharing can help explain that, or if there's experiences that they can give their kids, or whatever that could be. So that was just something I was thinking about. Great job.
Kelsey, absolutely love this. Over here in New Zealand, I work with youth and I coach parents how to parent teenagers, and so this is very useful. Thank you for the resource. Yeah, I'm hearing often parents of kids with kids who have been going to church most of their lives regularly are saying their teenagers as young as 13, 14 don't want to go to church anymore. And I love what you talked about in terms of journeying with them and sharing the highs and lows of faith in God, rather than sort of using information sharing type approach. So belief versus faith. I love that. I wonder how young a family or parents should start this process with their kids. Yes, it's teenage years, but is it something you start when they're 5, and it's just a natural progression that they just get used to, that God is always in the conversation? So
yeah, my mom was ready to fight me with that respect to my paper, because I let her read it and she was like, it needs to be children, and I'm like, I need to focus. Thank you. I can't do all ages. But yes.
That's a good answer, Kelsey. In trying to focus the paper, right? The paper is not going to solve every question or answer every question. So good.
Yes, Kelsey, I love that the paper, and yeah, play sharing it's yeah, interesting. And um I have one question is that when we as I have 3 children and I'm also in the ministry, so and I know how hard my childhood life was, so I see how parents are struggling, but what uh what okay, my question is how can we okay how or where would be the best to share with that? Is it like in devotion time or how we set is it making a schedule or like in evening? How do you find any particular? Do you find any helpful uh like schedule routine or something else? Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of the resources talk about, especially growing with, but a lot of the other resources too talk about doing this in spaces that you already have, right? Which is why parents pray a lot at the dinner table. That's a space that you can create if you can all eat together. But even doing it in like the car and having conversations about that, parents talk to their kids in the car, but how much of it do you actually talk about where was God and how did you feel that, you were kicked in the shin at soccer? Do you think God still loves the person that kicked you in the shin? Like including that God piece, I think is really what we're missing to be able to give them a Christian framework of how to think about life.
All right. Thank you for all of that, folks. We're going to go to the next person. Jason is up next.
I was going to say my only wish was that I didn't follow Kelsey. Good to see you all. And I'm kind of excited to share this, and it's a little bit different. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. So my topic had a few iterations. I started with how to best do youth ministry in a small church context with limited resources. And Steve and Andy kind of helped me, and Steve's main thing was keep it focused. So the topic becomes, how do we create a culture of mentoring in a local church where mentoring is not a present value? And the reason why that is key for youth group is reading Sticky Faith Innovation and seeing that the projection of that message is mentoring and guiding young emerging adults to discover their identity, belonging, and purpose takes not a program, but this relationship. And so the topic evolved after consultation with Steve, and it started sitting in finally the past 2 weeks. And it occurred to me that discipleship and mentoring might be interchangeable in some regard, depending on how you define it. And this is important to me because building a culture of mentoring may be the first step in allowing mentoring to happen in not just teens, but every age group, where a church has been program-based, tradition-based, and just really consumeristic. The culture of mentoring is a whole different dynamic in a ballgame. And so what's going on? What are the evidences? Emerging adults are finding themselves overburdened by schedules, distracted with more information accessible at their fingertips, and finding church to be irrelevant to their daily struggles and needs. And at the same time, churches have approached ministering to the emerging adults in at least 2 ways. First, the program over people aspect of youth ministry. The youths are often classified as really a department of a church. It is an important department because youth ministry indicates a semblance of a future and hope. And that's as per Andy Root's book, Faith Formation in a Secular Age, responding to church's obsession for youthfulness. These churches work very hard to create an attractive program that could grow, and nevertheless, the emphasis, whether conscious or subconscious, it fails to meet the youth where they are, to see them, to hear them, to say, I recognize you. Second, churches end up going from that transition to, because youth may be viewed as objects that fill their youth ministry. There's this desire to grow in the metrics of number and finances, that the dynamic programming of the church and even fruitful experiences such as short-term mission trips and overnight retreats becomes just the end goals rather than not part of the bigger process of helping them to become adults. However, these are very short-sighted, and as youth are primarily viewed in the short term, the question is, how do we help see them in the long-term view to find their identity? I love the 3 questions. Who am I? Where do I fit and what differences can I make? I think that's a lifelong journey. But here's a twist. I propose that it's not just youths that are wrestling with that, it's every age group, even the elderly. Hence, mentoring becomes not just a sliver for the teens, but the whole church. So I will try to focus this paper on the teens, but it fits in the larger context that if the church doesn't get it as a whole, mentoring can't be just one age group. It has to be the entire culture. And so why is this going on? There's a book called Do Hard Things that I stumbled upon in this research. It kind of came by an accident. My son and I decided to do discipleship together. And I could not believe how well this book fit in with this context. And I said, this is not even for my paper, it's for my son. It was written by twins who were teenagers at the time. And they had this realization. I had this realization from the book. The concept of teenagers was only a 70-year phenomenon. If you go before 70 years, there were only two age groups, children and adults. So like in the Bible, Mary was 14 to 16 when she gave birth. So everyone says, wow, what a faithful girl. How incredible to do that. It's actually us that's weird. That's the norm of every culture age group before 20th century. And so the point of this realization is that rather than providing youth to have a hope and optimism in discovering now, we need to realize they are the adults that can do adult things that need to be empowered and equipped. And so rather than settling for one chore a week, how do we use the Gen Z language, adulting, as the permanent basis for where they go? Emerging adults have not found in culture nor in individuals enough people who say to them, I see you, I believe in you. It's very hard to find that. We are glad they came. We are glad they had a retreat experience. Or maybe we just hope that they came to church. But every one of us, including the teens, want to be heard to find a place. So there's been a long time presumption that teenage life always existed, but that's not true. So the book that I was recommended that has hit this home is Big Questions, Worthy Dreams by Sharon Park. And this book is conceptually about mentoring and what ought to be going on. I borrowed a lot from her. What she says is mentoring in its classic sense is an intentional and appropriately reciprocal relationship between two individuals, a younger adult and an older, wiser figure who assists the younger person in learning the ways of life. That last part, learning the ways of life, it sounds like discipleship, it's mentoring, it's assisting this person to grow into this. But the other word in that definition she uses is reciprocal, that the mentor also gets something out of this relationship through learning just as much as the individual. And so churches are pressured to be program driven, but what if we reframed it to this mentoring relationship where there's this reciprocality happening? I think it's a paradigm shift, especially in our church. So how might we respond? What are some practical steps? I married this book with sticky faith innovation because I realized going through all the exercises was exciting and our youth leaders want to do it together. But the question I had was, what if we did this for the entire church? What if we discovered compassion, creativity, and just this longing, all of it from every age group, from the leadership on down? And just as a little anecdote, there was a youth girl in our church named Morelli, and her aunt from San Antonio discipled her by Zoom. She had a life-changing moment, more than anything else, just by Zoom, 30-minute Bible study. What are you getting out of it? What is God saying? And I realized she was mentoring digitally, and you saw substantial life change that stuck with her. And I realized that is an encouraging hope that we will be able to see mentoring as the basis of discipleship. And so how to unfold this into the larger church is the conclusion of my proposal. And the question is, how do I create this in an environment where people may not feel like being mentored? You can't force them to mentor. You can't force them to be mentored, to be mentee. But I was encouraged by just this quote from Jim Collins from Good to Great. This flywheel effect is a concept developed in Good to Great. It's that transformation never happens in one fell swoop. In building a great company or social sector enterprise, there's no single defining action, no grand program, no one killer innovation. And so I wanted to marry in my paper this idea, slow cultural transformation with the basis of Sharon Park's mentoring concepts. I'm marrying that with Steve and Caleb's paper in the book, Sticky Faith Innovation. And so the vision is, how can I create a teen mentoring model by shifting the whole church culture top down from leadership? And so that's my paper.
Yeah, well done, Jason. Yeah, sometimes it's hard to really narrow down the focus, isn't it? That's
Yes.
that's a challenge for everyone. But I really loved your comment around IVP questions, because they are human questions, right? They're not just for young people. I often talk about the fact that when for senior adults, or even those that are median age, where when they retire, they have to ask those three questions and answer those three questions all over again, right? Or when for our senior adults who lose their spouse after 50 years of marriage, they're asking those questions and having to figure that out again. So yeah, I mean, those are human questions, but for young people, it's always at the forefront of their minds, right? That's the difference.
Yes, that's the difference.
Is that it's always at the forefront, and Kara talks about it in terms of it's always at a rolling boil. If you're like boiling a pot of water, it's always at a rolling boil for them, rather than kind of in the background simmering for us adults who have gotten past some of those stages. So yeah, love it. And mentoring is a wonderful wonderful topic and idea. So yeah, I wonder what others have when it comes to Jason's paper.
So mentorship is a huge part in our youth group specifically. We're a church friend church, so we have a lot of teens that don't want to come to youth group, but it is wild. They will always say yes when adult takes them out. And so we have these teens that don't really want to participate, but they're hanging out with mentors. So I love this idea of the church taking it on, but I think two things made me wonder, because I'm really excited about the concept. One, how would we overcome mindsets of people that don't either think that they are capable of mentoring, or that just are afraid of teenagers and don't want to hang out with them, which is also very common, at least at my church. Yeah. And the other one is how to match people. How do we know who fits who? I love this concept, though.
Thank you. Great questions.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's a friend of mine leads a after school program in a city nearby here, and he took the program over like 2 years ago, and this was the big mindset that he had, is like, how do we change it from just a place that's kind of become like teenage daycare for families afterwards, and like how do we provide like business leaders and faith leaders and these students an opportunity to be mentored. And so yeah, it's really cool to like watch that transformation that hasn't been easy for them, but has been really powerful. One thing I was wondering about was, you had mentioned, and this was something that I had talked with my leaders about the other day, was the idea of like layering leadership too, that we have like in student ministries, like having older adults, middle-aged adults, college age, and like high school, like having that sort of rolling effect of people pouring into each other, and how to structure that. Like, do you require a mentor to have a mentor who's one stage ahead of them or two stages ahead of them, or like, because sometimes somebody who's mentoring doesn't have all the answers, but they have somebody that if they're being mentored, they might be able to process those things with, and then get back to their student with them later. So that was just something I was thinking about, is like, how do you encourage mentors to have mentors as well, so that they can have that sort of place that they can go to process things that maybe they've never experienced before. So yeah, great job. I love that idea.
Thank you so much. I'll write that down. Yeah.
Yeah, Jason, when you said that you were doing discipleship with your son, I'm like, you are the dream of every youth pastor. That's the goal, right? So I really liked everything that you're saying, and some of the things that are coming out through your research. I wonder if, you're talking about changing the culture, and how do we kind of cast this vision for this kind of reciprocal mentorship, discipleship culture. I'm wondering if there's any way we can start with the parents, right? Because we, as youth pastors, as youth ministries, we only see their kids for 3 hours a week at most. What are the ways that we can encourage parents? And you're setting the example already, right? You're already setting the bar yourself. What are some ways we can encourage parents? And I know that in some church contexts, there are language barriers. So then the parents are like, well, I can't do it and I'm like, that's part of the reason, but you can, there are things you can do. Yeah, so I guess I'm wondering, like, what are some of the ways that we can encourage parents and families actually to really lean into this? Yeah, it's good.
Jason, I absolutely love it. I think a concept that came to mind was the reverse 5-to-1 ratio that Fuller talks about. And so just, being able to facilitate for all of our children 5 relationships of adults who care. And I think this kind of takes it a bit deeper in terms of defining it as mentoring, which is really cool. I wonder whether because often there's the confusion or the difference in definition between coaching, mentoring, discipleship, all these words. And so, so I wonder if that's something to look into to define the differences between those.
I did explore that, and that was one of the questions that came up. What's the difference between coaching, mentoring, disciple? Yes, is that?
Yeah, and I think it's a bit of the posture that we take, right? When it's when we as adults come to young people thinking that they're a project to be taken on, or if it's that they have problems, they're a problem that we need to solve in some way. I think that's the difference of a mentor or someone who's going to journey with them rather than trying to fix them, right? So awesome. Thank you for that, Jason. Well done. And the next person is Cynthia. So let's give Cynthia her 10 minutes.
Okay, so mine is very similar to Jason. So we're just going to dive in. Here's what I want you to do, though. I want you to think about where you were in March of your senior year in high school. And we're going to rapid fire. Give me a couple emotions that you felt in March of your senior year in high school. Just unmute yourselves and just, what are some emotions? March, for me, it was March of 2002. And I was filled with anxiety, for sure.
Relief, I guess. That was a long time ago. Senior, anyway. I won't say what, but that was a long time ago.
I was March of 2000, and I graduated in January. So I was just, I don't even remember. I just remember being chill, I guess. Didn't care where I was or where I was going. I was just chill.
For me,
I was
hope and
March. Go ahead.
for me, hope and anticipation. That was
I was March of 98, and I felt kind of hopeful just to get out of the house kind of thing and kind of explore, but a little anxious as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. So keep that in mind. So I am proposing a mentoring program specifically with high school seniors that starts in their senior year of high school. And I love yours, Jason. And yes, we'll talk about why I'm starting in high school, and wouldn't it be better to just start somewhere else? But let me bring up my slides. Here we go. So as a youth pastor, I've noticed that there is a disconnect that happens when seniors graduate and they go off to whatever is next. And many of my former students don't return to church as young adults or as emerging adults. So they could have been really deeply ingrained in their church context, but as a 24-year-old, they are no longer involved. And I've also watched a lot of my students be really stressed out during their senior year. They kind of fall off the map. They're inundated with projects and papers. I live in an affluent community. They have life coaches, SAT tutors, just a bunch of things that take up their time. So I started to be curious about what happens in the transition from high school to whatever comes next. And I wondered if there was a way for the church to support seniors as they prepare to cross from high school to adulthood. So the question that I'm asking is, during their year of transition, how can the church lean in and strengthen relational bonds with high school seniors while also equipping these budding emerging adults to face the future with less fear and anxiety? Barna did a study that revealed as high school seniors get closer and closer to their graduation date, their anxiety, fear, and dread about the future ramps up. And so they have all these emotions, and where do they go to process those emotions? Well, what I'm proposing, the answer that I'm proposing is that high school seniors would benefit from mentoring relationships through a seniors only small group that starts their final year of high school and continues into the future. Jason and I had this same book, Sharon Parks, her book on mentoring, and all of those relationships are really awesome. And she proposes a mentoring community, which is a small group model that creates a network of belonging so that it's not just a one-to-one relationship. So it's a little bit different than yours, Jason, but I appreciated her research on that. So I'm really leaning on her idea behind that. But I lost my one slide, hold on. The only reason I have slides is for this one quote that I want you guys to read. So I started to look around and think, well, what's going on in the lives of high school seniors that they would benefit from this mentoring relationship? Because why is it different? Why would a mentoring relationship be different than what we do as youth pastors all the time? So let me share this quote. Dr. Varun Soni is the Dean of Religious Life at University of Southern California. And what he says is, what I've noticed about my work with students is that many of them face the same hidden root challenge, loneliness. I never got the question in my first 5 years at USC that I now get almost daily from students. How do I make friends? Students may have thousands of friends online, but few in real life. They may be experts at talking with their thumbs, but not so much with their tongues. And as a result, many feel as though they don't have a tribe or a sense of belonging, and they feel disconnected from what it means to be human. And I thought that linked really closely with the questions of identity, belonging, and purpose, because students, when they don't have a link between identifying with a group and the ability to apply meaning to their existence, they become really disconnected and vulnerable. And so as high school seniors transition from a place of belonging, hopefully if they belong in their families, in their school, in their youth group, when they leap that gap and cross the threshold, that sense of belonging can be disrupted. And so what he identified was something that I was seeing throughout all the research. And the question becomes, why is it happening? So there's a lot of reasons developmentally, but what I wanted to focus on for today are anxiety, loneliness, and disconnection. And so Barna has done a bunch of research, specifically in 2022, but they noticed a correlation between levels of anxiety and church involvement. So as older students grow, respondents around 21, they reported double the anxiety level of 11-year-olds. And what they also charted was at the same time as teenagers progress through their teen and young adult years, they're less likely to attend church. So their anxiety levels are going up, but their church attendance is actually going down. And so there's a correlation between those two behaviors. So then the question is, okay, well, what are they feeling internally? So the questions that seniors carry that I've found, they feel really heavy. Like, will I actually make friends in college? Will I fail a college class? And so they have lots of fear and anxiety about the future. They certainly do present like super excited, but underneath that, there's also a bunch of dread and fear of failure. So the question is, why have so many emerging adults disconnected from the church? So I just wanted to focus on three: authenticity, accountability, and hypocrisy. So a lot of Gen Z students are looking for accountability and authenticity. They're looking for people who want to invite them to live an authentic life. Jesus lived an authentic life, and I think they really desire getting to know the ways that Jesus was authentic. However, they're also layering that with news stories like Church Too and the Me Too movement, or stories of leaders who have character gaps, as Kara and Jen and and Brad Griffin wrote about in Faith Beyond Youth Group, that there are these character gaps that they're watching adults have that impacts the way they think about and trust organized religion. And then there's just hypocrisy when believers don't live out what they say they will, or what they say Jesus said, and they don't live that same way. So then the question is, what ought to be going on? So here's some really good news for all of us who feel young at heart. The good news is that emerging adults, well, that's not good. They don't trust institutions like the church. The good news is they do trust relationships with adults. So if they need advice, they will go to older adults. They won't trust the church as a whole, but they'll trust that relationship. However, the same group that reported 73% that said that they would trust an adult also said that the way that they interact with the adult matters because they don't often feel heard. That older generations don't understand what it's like for them to be in their stage of life. So good news and places where we can grow. They will come to us. However, they want to be validated and they want empathy before they're corrected for their behavior. So seniors really value this practice of making meaning out of their experience. Like, why are they going through this trouble of doing all of these college applications? Why are they going through all of these moments that they're calling the last moment, the last class, the last time you do this, the last event? They need adults to kind of reframe that and help them make meaning out of all of this chaos. So I propose mentoring. We're going to go to the old definition. So the word mentor calls to mind the Greek meno, meaning to abide or to remain. And if the word abide brings up very graphic images of vines and branches, then we know we grew up in church. And the most important way that abide is used is when Jesus says, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me, if you abide, and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. So mentor relationships are adults who remain. And in the transitions of life, specifically for high school seniors, there's so much disconnection. There are so many relationships that fall away. So a very basic definition of a mentor is someone who remains when everyone else falls away.
Mm.
So then they're the stable relationships. And then I'll just finish with this. So what's next? Well, that's a great question. A lot of the difficulty of the seniors only small group is deciding when it ends, how far it continues after graduation. There's a lot of questions about how often you can meet. The more that people hear about this, the more that they want it to extend. Yeah, until they're 25, 29. So the next step would be to establish a small group and then kind of figure out how you want to go about meeting, and then what the criteria is for going beyond that. But how will churches know that they are successful? I have so many conversations with students in college who still reach out. And so the mentoring community knows they're successful if students continue to reach out post-graduation. Do they have a lifeline with the people in their small group? That's a way of success. So there you go.
Thank you, Cynthia. Love the concept. And for those of you that have had senior only like small groups, you see the benefits of that. I will just say, and then we'll let a few people talk, because you did go a little long, and so we want to kind of stay on track. But if I was going back and doing youth ministry in a local church context again, I would use the +1 model, at least the +1 model, which is at least the freshman year in college, that the small group leaders who were with them in their senior year stays with them in college, and utilizes whatever the time, they can either meet by Zoom or whatever, or they utilize that time that they would have spent with them in small groups on a weekly basis to write notes, send texts, and that kind of is the time for words of encouragement for those students. And so yeah, if I went back and did my youth ministry days again, that's the way that I would structure that time. So yeah, wonder, I wish, I wonder. Couple of folks.
Cynthia, I really like how you mentioned it's a difficult thing to say, I guess, but that young people don't trust the church as a whole, how they're feeling about the church as a whole, but they do trust older adults that they have a relationship with. And so I'm wondering, like, how can we as youth pastors kind of like build on those relationships so that they do regain trust in the church as a whole? And you kind of pointed out why they don't have that trust with the authenticity, accountability, and hypocrisy. So how do we as youth leaders help parents and the church at large kind of like develop in those areas about being authentic, being accountable, and building a culture where even the adults feel like they can be authentic, so that it kind of models it for the students? But I really like how you talked about that trust issue is really important between the church and the adults.
Yeah, that's a great question, Brian. For all of us to ponder. In my paper, I just, mentors are those who love Jesus and deeply love the church. And so I'm hoping through that positive reflection with a mentor who deeply loves the community, and whether or not the emerging adult moves back home, that they'll become involved in the church community because they've seen it modeled by the adults in their mentoring group who love it.
I wonder, so our students, I remember we had a conversation and they were like, yes, like the church is a hot mess and Christians are terrible and they do this, they come at you with this. But if you ask, who like name who has been this person for you. And I think a lot of times, at least in my experience, they haven't been able to, nobody that I know of. And I wonder if that is a connection, like some on like this online disconnect and idea of the church versus the people that they know representing Christians. And I wonder how those things correlate and how that would affect how you present mentorship in this realm. It was really good. Good job.
Thank you.
I
Hey,
really like this.
Cynthia.
Go, Bianca, go, girl.
No, I'm sorry. You go ahead. Okay. Cynthia, great job. I really enjoyed that one thing I've always loved is that you are so focused on a specific season of youth, and that's usually, the high school going into young adulthood. And I love that you're focused on that. And I can just continue to hear your passion. So great job. I wonder though, if you ever have thought about writing to that audience, not just for the church, but to actual seniors and those that are starting college, like actually being giving advice for them and giving them some hope as well as they're moving into that season. So just a thought.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah,
great.
and I love Cynthia, your good job. And your question and your presentation triggered me to think. I totally agree. The relationship is very important, and that was also the question I struggled with 7 years ago when my daughter was in high school. So I totally agree that the parents and the mentors have the good relationship with those students the young people in high school. Then they still connected with the church after they enter the stage of young adult. So good job. And I also think that your project and your idea can cooperate with Jason's, and I love that your idea that the cross generation, the mentorship or the discipleship make it across generations in the family. But I'm just wonder, will it cause many conflicts among parents and child?
Yeah, that's a good question. I will, yes, incorporate, yeah. It gets messy when it's parents involved, but yes. I know I take too much time, but thanks everyone. Just send me all your things. Thank you.
Yeah, and you can ask, you can keep asking questions or share your wonderings in chat, and you can kind of interact in that way. But we do want to turn it over to Brian. Brian, you are next.
Hey everybody. Such good presentations. I have to say it's literally lifted my spirits just being with you guys, and after this long, arduous, beautiful, amazing process of writing this paper, just to be with y'all is a joy, and to hear your work and all of that is so encouraging. So my topic is evangelism. It's something that I've struggled with, just kind of the way that it's been done for a long time. My dad and my granddad were both pastors, and they participated in all kinds of mission projects that were evangelistic in nature and things like that. So that's why I really have a deep passion for it, because I do believe that students should share their faith, but I question and wonder about the traditional forms of evangelism that have kind of been passed down over the years, literally back hundreds of years to our current landscape. I like to refer to these traditional forms of evangelism as kind of a cheap evangelism, kind of working off of Bonhoeffer's like cheap grace. It's just kind of like, do the very basic to kind of pull people in to believe a certain way, that kind of thing. And so I'm going off of the idea that these traditional forms of evangelism are insufficient because they're disconnected. They involve rote forms of memorization, and they don't really kind of dig into a relational connection with the other person. So I asked the question, how can the theological teachings and practices of youth ministry move beyond the traditional forms of evangelism to invite students into a journey of faith formation that recognizes the Imago Dei in all people while fostering identity, belonging, and purpose? And so my answer to that, and what I really hope to get at in the paper, is to offer the idea of holistic evangelism. So what's going on? Let's address that question. What's going on is that youth ministries have tried, they said, hey, you know what? These traditional forms of evangelism have, they brought some good in some ways. People have accepted Christ and they learn more about Jesus and they walk with God and they have done good things. But how can we move deeper and come up with ways that are more complete, more holistic? And so what that has led to is kind of like and I don't have the quote here. It's what he called evangelistic paralysis. Like basically, you go from this like zealous, like we've got to share Jesus at every moment of the day, to like, well, I'm not really sure when I'm supposed to speak up or how I'm supposed to speak up, so I'll just forget it. And so students are kind of left wondering, like, how do I even share? How do I even share my faith? And so that has led into this kind of like teaching that is kind of like shying away from the hard topics of like how do we do evangelism well. And so I love it where they talked about uh, Smith and gosh, what is her name? The other person talked about the MTD, the moralistic therapeutic deism. And so this was done as a way to get people into the church. Like, well, if I can't really talk about some of the more issues that kind of like separate people, let's just kind of have a common ground so that we can, Smith and Denton, so that we can get people to come. But as we know, a moralistic therapeutic deism is incomplete. Also, youth ministries have been influenced by culture, by white normativity. Youth ministries, especially like in areas here where there are the larger churches. If you go to these larger churches, you're going to find a very everybody's going to look the same in a lot of the churches. They're going to believe the same in many of the churches in the local area here, even though, interestingly enough, we are one of the most diverse places on the planet, like literally in the United States. The local area is here. However, again, if you go to the youth ministries, and I've been a part of two or three, like actually I know them. Their youth ministries are not hardly diverse at all. So white normativity is, affecting that, which obviously affects the experiences that students have who are not part of the dominant culture. They feel left out. They don't feel like they can share their experiences. And even the students in the dominant culture feel that way too, because there's not a safe space. So why is it going on? Ministries, and this is one of the ideas that I learned about through the research, and I had a friend tell me about it um, a while back about a bounded set. It's a bounded set versus a centered set. And so the bounded set says that we're in a box, and everybody who is able to get in, they have to believe a certain way, they have to look a certain way. And if you're not, then you're out. It's kind of like focused on ins and outs, focused on what separates us instead of what's uniting us. Also, there's a focus on individualistic practices, like how much are you praying, how much are you reading your Bible, and spiritual growth is kind of like left up to the person to like do the work on their own instead of in community. So there's a big focus on on individualistic practices. Also, the location of theology and ethics sits within the church community. So basically, like if you want to learn anything about God or about life and religion, you need to do it within the church. And if you do it outside of the church, chances are what you learned is evil and bad and not good. So um, that's there's a focus of like us versus them. Also in what's going on, the focus is on entertainment, and like entertaining kids so that they'll show up. There's also a fear of others, that is built based on the white normativity. And also there why this stuff is going on is that churches want to maintain power in the culture. And I really liked the quote from Guter that or Gruder. I'm really I need to enlarge the screen here. But basically that churches have used, and we see it in today, obviously. I don't want to get political here, but we see how the church uses its influence and power to like control the government and kind of control society at large. So what ought to be going on? We need to move away from these outdated and incomplete forms of evangelism and go toward what is called a centered set. And the centered set is where Jesus is at the center, and instead of focusing on belief, it focuses on movement, like the movement of each person toward being more like Jesus. And so that shapes how people have conversations. Instead of having a conversation to try to win a debate or have the person believe exactly like you have a conversation that's a dialogue to ask, like, how is this moving you and us toward being more like Jesus? And you focus on things that unite you. Also, we need to overcome individualistic practices by, having practices that are communal and teaching students to be more communal instead of individualistic. Although being individualistic, it's both and it's not either or. Also, demonstrating to students like how the early church um, did hospitality and how they expressed their faith in Jesus through hospitality, and they took care of their neighbor um, and showed them kindness in different ways. And through that, they were able to share their faith. It was more of a lifestyle than it was about memorizing a certain set of verses to go share out with random people. Um, Also, through the practice of hospitality, we need to talk about listening to others, the critical realist perspective about, that everybody has experiences that are real to them and they're meaningful to them. And so when we just walk up to somebody and just start talking about belief in God, they're kind of thrown off by that. And so to honor the experiences of other people, teach students to do that so that they're able to listen and share openly and honestly. Um, and also to show students how hospitality builds belonging. Like I love the quote by Drury where she says, "Shared memories tell us that we belong." And how Romero and I don't know how to say the last name, Lou, that all cultures are welcome, how they talk about how because Jesus is redeeming the world, that all cultures are valid and welcome, and there's not one culture above the other. And so how do we respond? We need to lighten the emotional load that's placed on students to share their faith at every corner by talking about how we participate with Christ and not just imitate Christ. I think that's Root who talked about that. And also that we need to there was a we need to invite youth leaders and parents to incorporate communal practices and ask youth leaders to work. And I think parents would be a great place to start as well, to work to find balance between individual and communal activities. And we need to teach students that they can learn from anyone, that they don't have to be in that bounded set where they have to learn just from people from the church, but that they can learn from people from around the world. And then we need to create a safe space for students to take risks so that no one at any time feels like any question they ask or any problem that they have is going to get them kicked out and things like that. So I think in conclusion, just giving students a holistic vision of what evangelism looks like and not just a very simple, cheap view of it but help them to be able to dig deep into what evangelism looks like so that they can enjoy the fruits of interacting and dialoguing with people from all walks of life.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Good job. Good job.
Thank you. Thank you.
I mean, evangelism is hard, and shifting the model, the mental model of what evangelism should be and should look like, is a challenge for sure. And I love the relational aspect of the evangelism that you're talking about, and I think young people are much better at it than the adults when it comes to relational evangelism like that. So, great. Yeah, I wish, I wonder.
I really like the bounce set and the center set piece. Actually, Weyoung introduced that to me during the Fuller cohort, and how you're incorporating that into this idea of evangelism is fantastic in that model. And I wish maybe for teens a little bit, how would they kind of visualize that and picture that a little bit more, and kind of in the fleshing that out would be something that I look forward to seeing in your paper, and kind of seeing adolescents as they're searching for meaning and purpose, how evangelism might fit in would be a fantastic tie-in. Great job, Brian.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great question.
Brian, I think it's really interesting. I wonder if the word evangelism carries just some weight, like it carries a burden, that changing that culture of making it positive, or going back to what it used to mean, might be a hurdle just for younger generations. So I just wonder if that word is taboo now, unfortunately.
Yeah, there
Yeah,
was
when
actually I was going to read a quote. It said, it turns out, and you may know this person, Audrey Assad, she said, it turns out that on the other side of believing in hell as an eternal place of conscious torment, it freed me up to deal with the conscious torment I was already living in. And that if I wasn't in a constant state of anxiety about saving souls, I could actually start healing mine.
Yeah, one thing I've been thinking about around evangelism is how often are we evangelizing people to be a part of our program rather than evangelizing them to Jesus too? Like I wrestle with this, like with being a part of Young Life, and I love being a part of Young Life, and often it is the place that's known as like high energy and tons of hype and all of this sort of stuff. And the way students talk about inviting their friends is like, hey, you should come and hang out with us. It's a ton of fun, like so on and so forth. And so it's like where I wonder how much of evangelism was actually about like evangelizing people to our church or our program rather than actually evangelizing people to Jesus. That's just a thought that I've been wrestling with over the past, I don't know, maybe year or so too. But yeah, really liked your presentation, man. Oh, and I felt a little bit triggered when you talked about the being super zealous and then all of a sudden, wondering whether or not you should ever share your faith again too, because that was me to a nutshell the minute I graduated high school. So brought back great memories.
All
Yeah,
right.
great question. I love that question.
Yeah. Let's take a break. It is 22 past the hour. We're a few minutes behind, but not bad. And we actually have one less person, so we've got a little time to play with than the other group. So let's come back at 35 after. So about 13 minutes, and then Weyoung is on deck. So Weyoung will lead us right at 35 after. All right, see you in a little bit. All right, so Mavis, just start us off.
Okay, I'm good. Okay, hi everyone. My topic is how can a youth pastor apply practical theology to guide intimacy in youth relationship? So as I kept listening, so I realized that, there are a lot of similarity in our findings. So I just want to start with the introduction to my my paper. it is my experience working with youth ministry at Vancouver Church recently. The church is facing a changing, actually it's like beyond now where he stopped, so many immigrants from other countries. Well, we have many young people moving on, and recently an influx of from Hong Kong, all the refugees, because of the there's a refugee scheme offered by Canada. So now this church facing a changing of the demographic. So I'm explore how practical theology can be a powerful tool to address this specific needs of these young people. So and this church is 50 anniversary this year. So it's quite old church or a history church. So like many Chinese churches, we face the challenge of a departing secondary generation. So many young people have moved on, and some go to the English congregation. So currently, our congregation consists of 80% Christians who age 55 and above. So, however, as I mentioned before, recent we have a shift. Then the significant numbers of young Hong Kong immigrants have arrived through the refugee scheme, now forming a vital part of our younger participants. So given this context, so the samples in this paper may be specific, and this study aims to explore how practical theology can be applied to help young pastors to revitalize their ministry. So as the young pastor, I connected with the young refugees through church programs for new immigrants recently. This fostered a sense of trust and allowing them to confide in their struggles. So almost the same, loneliness and insecurity emerge as a common theme among these young groups, often stemming from isolation due to lack of established social network in Canada right now. So some of them facing financial and emotional challenges. So they turned to cohabitation because they want to save some money and to get some closer support. So creating internal conflict among Christians with their faith. Some high school group, most of them are staying in the host families. So they wrestled with romantic relationship and navigating premarital intimacy in a new cultural context. Because to Hong Kong and Canada, most Canada is relatively an open society. So these interactions ignited a passion among our youth pastors to explore how the church can better address the personal growth of these young people. So this essay, we argue that true intimacy for youth goes beyond the physical and emphasizing a yearning for deep spiritual connection and support. So as many developmental psychologists emphasize, the need for intimacy is a necessary stage in youth development, crucial for their holistic well-being. Moreover, the Bible affirmation of their desires equally important. So from a book, Our Body Tells God's Story, it's also said that from the theology of the body, we know that the scripture portrayal of human connection emphasizes the mutual respect and love, and we are all reflecting the image of God. So from this theological basis, we want to, through the practical theology, to help to bridge up the gap between the theology I learned and the practice in the church ministry. So this framework, which combines human knowledge with religious ideas to understand real life situation, so allows church to connect with young people on a deeper level. So our pastoral care can be rooted in the theological tradition and scripture and some of our liturgies. So I want to suggest theological reflections, a call for renewal for the church with such a long history and tradition. So we want to have some renewal for these groups of young people. So I put the into 5 areas for how to engage young people through the church practices. Just like our worship, so I suggest reframing worship as a vibrant and relatable experience that allows young people to connect with God's presence and utilize the liturgy as a set of prayer and rituals as a playbook to facilitate meaningful participation in worship for the younger generations. And we try to share the gospel message effectively and equipping young people to share their faith. And we're providing some supportive and accepting church family that offer guidance and care during the challenging times. And of course, we will facilitate in-depth learning about the Bible and Christian doctrine in a way that set boundaries and provide guidance for the young people. Beyond tailored the youth worship, we suggest the young pastor can develop programs and activities that are related with young people and related to their need. So initiatives include personality quiz. Now we are always doing some personality quiz like MBTI or Enneagrams to spark discussion on faith and identity with the young groups, and storytelling and the storytelling workshops using narrative approaches to create a safe place or space for young people to share their experiences and finding a way of healing. So, and also the family camps can also be variable, especially for young people without family in Canada. These camps can foster connection between 2 generations, older and younger. And these practical initiatives, couples with the church commitment to offering social connections, a sense of belongings, and spiritual guidance, aim to empower young people to overcome their initial challenges and thrive in their new home. So my conclusion is that imagine a group of new friends who just moved to town. You want to help them feel welcome and connected. Practical theology is like using what you know about God, like the stories from the Bibles, the hospitality, then they feel welcome, and people, how they act and feels to figure out the best way to support them. Especially some Christian, they move to Canada and they may maybe get some loneliness, or they feel disconnect with the church. So in the same way, churches can apply all the real life approach to help young people by taking the time to understand their needs, offering support, and involving them to the church activities, then church can become a place of hope and belongings for young people searching for deeper connection and meaning in their lives.
Mm.
That's all.
Thank you, Mavis. Yeah, well done.
Thank you.
Well done. And I can't even imagine. I mean, to immigrate into a new country, and to as a young adult and try to establish a sense of belonging somewhere. And so what an opportunity for the church to really step into that space. But yet, opportunity and the commitment that it takes to really for them to fill that space with them, and understand their real goal there, rather than just adding to the numbers or really focusing on just the programming part. So thanks for sharing all of that, and look forward to reading more about your work there. Others want to jump in there?
At the workshops on identity that use the personality test. That sounds awesome. That sounds like a good time. I was just wondering how it translates through different cultures and the lenses that people use, if the language around those types of personality, they're not, I don't, experiences, the quizzes, if that is just cross cultures, how that translates. I was just curious about that.
Not easy to do that.
That's a good answer. That's a good answer. Others, I like, I wish, I wonder.
One thing that you spoke about is how they cohabitate because it makes life easier for them. And we were just talking today at work about how sometimes encouraging people to not live with each other, like not move in with a boyfriend and not do that, if how that can be attached to shame culture sometimes. So I wonder how that can be safely done in your context to where it's encouraging and inspiring, and then just to avoid the idea or the feeling of shame, especially if they feel that it's a necessity, a financial necessity for them to survive. It's intriguing.
Yeah, that's true, really true. So it's hard for us to deal with this situation, but we have to do, because otherwise the other brothers and sisters will see that, oh, it's an example. So we need to try all our resources to help them to get rid of this situation.
Yeah.
Thank you all for your questions and feedback. Thank you.
All right, I think we have room for one more if anyone has any likes or wonders.
Yeah, I think I like that you're paying attention to. It would be really easy to just say where you're from in general, like Canada. This is a big issue, but honing in kind of on your cultural background is really important. And I think there is a lot of similarities that are happening even in different cultural contexts as the world gets much more expensive. And you talked about that necessity part. And so I wonder what connections there are between, if this is just a couple cultural contexts that are dealing with this, or if this is like a bigger thing that's even happening outside of the United States. That's just something that I'm just wondering about, because the world is getting vastly more expensive to live in, as many of us are feeling.
Yeah. I'm working with some Hong Kong leaders right now, and they told me that the average age of marriage in their culture is almost 32. So average age of first marriage is 32 years old, which is a little bit older than the US. 30 is the US, right? 29 to 30, somewhere in there. But what was fascinating to me was most everyone lives at home until that time. And then even after they get married, they said that sometimes they still live at home with their parents because of the cost of living, and unable to really afford the apartment or rent an apartment, much less owning anything. So yeah, interesting. So, well, thank you, Mavis, for all of that. Yep, grateful for your work on that. We're gonna come back to Wee Young because he just held us in suspense after capturing our imagination. So Wee Young, you were going we heard you for about the first 5 minutes, so I
Okay.
think we're about halfway through. If you want to throw up a slide, I think
Yeah.
we can probably tell you where we last
Sure.
you. So
Let me try. My computer's not cooperating this morning, so let's see. Is that the slide you guys have seen? Talking to Maori people.
yep.
Okay. Right. So here we go. Let me just organize myself real quick. So in 1840, the Treaty of Waitangi set in place an agreement between the British Crown and the Maori, New Zealand's indigenous people. The signed treaty resulted in a significant misunderstanding around the word governance. The unresolved colonial history of New Zealand has left tensions in parts of society and made it difficult for the emerging generation to relate to its history in a positive manner. Since its founding as a nation, New Zealand has grown largely through immigration. The Education Review Office of New Zealand, the ERO, states that by 2043, it's expected that more than 1 in 4 learners in New Zealand will be from an ethnic community. The speed at which New Zealand is becoming multicultural is likely to increase the dilution of education amongst young immigrants. So what ought to be going on? God created humans in his image, the Imago Dei. God's image is communal, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Therefore, humans are created communal and relational. A common way we relate is through our ethnic heritage. Acts 17:26-27 suggests that our ethnic culture and location of residence is by design. Furthermore, Revelation 7 verse 9 says our ethnicity is eternal. Therefore, identification with our ethnic heritage and community is an essential part of how God created us. Social psychologist Dr. Marilyn Brewer has found that people have a basic need for connection to others, which they achieve via their affiliation with an in-group. Identity formation is not a destination, but a lifelong journey that we need to teach teenagers to embark upon, and it's vital that we journey alongside them as adults who care about them. Multi-generational connections are absolutely essential. So how could we respond? The practice of testimony can be described as a narration of events seen or heard. Ricoeur defines it as relating what one has seen or heard. Why testimony? The giving and receiving of testimony or storytelling is powerful because it's in these early adolescent years that most individuals begin to understand their lives in storied and historic terms. Drury explains that those of us receiving the testimony were also being formed. Storytelling isn't just entertainment, it's a way to protect your heritage and culture. The Maori culture has an oral tradition where skills, folklore, and traditions are passed from generation to generation through storytelling.
Amanda Drury also states powerfully that the act of making a verbal statement carries with it something concrete that alters one's understanding of self and the community in which he or she belongs. In today's increasingly isolated world, Gen Z are described as the most connected and yet the loneliest generation. The practice of giving and receiving testimony not only meets the objective of passing on heritage and assisting with identity formation in teenagers, it also fulfills the human need to connect and to relate. See, when families sit together across generations to exchange stories, fun, love, and laughter are experienced and communicated through the quality time spent together. Vulnerability and authenticity are virtues that are lacking but powerful in today's society. In her TED Talk on the power of vulnerability, Brené Brown states, vulnerability is basically uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. In an increasingly secular New Zealand where 48% indicated no religion or none in the 2018 census, and only 31% considering themselves Christians, teenagers are growing up with a negative perception and skepticism towards the Christian faith. The use of testimonies and storytelling delivered with vulnerability and authenticity provide a more effective starting point for youth groups to help teenagers, both those who have a church background and those without a church background, to move towards the story of God, the good news of the gospel. The grand meta-narrative of the gospel is a story. Testimonies provide many good segues to the story of God. Through testimonies, teenagers are more likely to encounter Jesus, like the tax collector or the woman.
Computer just keeps giving up on him.
Wee Young, are you still on your phone?
Hey, Andy, am I off again?
Yeah, your computer's off. You want to just
hang on,
finish
hang on.
up your last thought there?
I'm here on my phone.
Yeah.
Did I jump off again?
Yeah, you did, and you were just at the last point that you were going to make in the last slide, I think.
Right. I'll just read it from my phone. You
Yeah.
won't see the slide. Okay, so so churches have the unique opportunity to engage multi-generationally where grandparents, children, and grandchildren can participate in activities in community. If church youth groups, and in conclusion, if church youth groups can curate safe and non-judgmental environments, either in real life or online for teenagers to give and receive stories, deepen their identification with their heritage, process doubts together, and learn more about the Bible and how a biblical worldview is congruent with their everyday lives, teenagers will come out of their adolescent years stronger, more confident, and secure. Teenagers with a strong sense of self, mental well-being, will be fertile ground for the gospel to form in them a congruent spiritual identity, and they will also become an exciting force for change for the future and effective workers in the harvest field of the gospel. Sorry, everyone, for the technical troubles.
No, you're fine. Thanks for getting to the finish line on that. And yeah, I mean, just such a fascinating history and understanding of the culture there, and grateful for you to share that. And yeah, I mean, just the sense of belonging is such an elusive thing for young people, and especially young people of minority, whatever type of minority that we're talking about, right? And so, yeah, jump in. I wish, I wonder.
Good job, Young. I love at the very end, you mentioned how do we engage multi-generationally. This is something that I think about all the time in my context too, and I actually talk about stories too. But I really like this idea of how do we help the youth, or how do we help teens use stories and to engage multi-generationally, or to engage like across these boundaries. In your presentation, you talk about colonial tensions and like, how do we kind of help teens to connect and relate? And I think that leaning into stories, especially personal stories, is maybe something. And I wonder how we do that even beyond the context of ministry, using stories to help us connect, especially in a time where it seems like it's become increasingly harder for us to connect across personal differences and divides, right? Even though technologically we're more connected than ever, but it seems like we're not connected. And it's just the differences just seem to kind of get, well, there are more and more differences, I guess. But yeah, I really like how you approached it. Yeah, it's good.
Thank you. Thanks, bro.
Great job, Young. I love how you brought in Brene Brown's thought about vulnerability, because I think that plays a key role in sharing the stories, and just kind of like emphasizing that with parents and students and allowing them the opportunities to experience it in a safe environment. And so, yeah, and I love how the history you brought to like contextualize your situation was amazing. Yeah, good work.
Thanks, Brian.
I love how you use storytelling in understanding it can form belonging. But I wonder how we teach others to listen to that storytelling instead of just trying to take it in as like we're trying to tell them how to think. Right? How do you listen to someone else's story, even though you might not understand it or agree with it?
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Kelsey. Thank you for that.
Yeah, two things I was wondering about, Young, was one, in an increasingly globalized world, how does that get harder to do in terms of like connecting with one's heritage, as there are so many different things that you could relate more to, even though it's not your, there are just different parts of stories that you relate to. And so how would that be harder? And how does that, on the flip side, how does that also help us in helping people connect with aspects of other stories that may be helpful for where they're at in life? So it's kind of a double-edged thing of wondering, how does it make it harder and how does it make it easier for us to relate through stories?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Chris.
All right, thanks, Wee Young. Let's keep moving. And so the next person is Bianca. Good to see you, Bianca. And yeah,
Hey.
time is yours.
All right. Well, it's been awesome hearing from everybody tonight. Everybody's just, wow, I'm blown away. So excited to share a little bit of mine. I'm going to share my screen here. All right. Let's go to, yeah. Can you all see that? All right. Uh-oh. I switched it too fast. Hold on. Let me go back here. Sorry about that. There we go. So I know my time is ticking. Sorry about that. So as I was reflecting on my own story and my own identity as a woman, as a woman of color, I was reading and looking at some podcasts and some YouTube videos of anything around Black girl identity, and so I wanted to connect it with the church. I wanted to connect it with the Black church experience, because most, majority of Black girls are coming out of a Black church context. But as I've been reflecting on my own, I think about where I came from and what produced me, and what entity it was that supported me and undergirded me as I was learning about my spiritual walk and learning about who I was as a woman, as a Black woman, and who I was as a Christian woman. And so as I started my paper, I'm reflecting back in the 90s when I was in youth ministry, and the two women that had a huge significance of my my identity and who I was. And they were two of the first ordained women in my church in the 120 something year history. And so I started thinking about how they were forerunners for me. They were forerunners for who I was going to become. And one of them was my youth pastor. So I had a female youth pastor. And so I started thinking about what that looks like for me and for and who I was going to be. So my paper is around young Black girls' spiritual identity in the Black church. And so my question I started with, my research question is, how can youth ministry help young Black girls understand their identity as Christian leaders in a male-driven patriarchal Black church experience? Black girls and women have struggled in leadership roles in the Black church experience, which informs their leadership identity because of I'm sorry, it should say male dominated space associated within the Black church. So for a young girl, Christian girl, there is an opportunity through youth ministry to help them form their identity and leadership identity in the church, and to support them as she explores and understands her own identity for leadership in the church. So what is going on? What is happening? Why is this a problem to discuss and hopefully solve? Well, the Black church has conservative history, but it leans liberal in a lot of its conversation, its thought, but it's very conservative historically, and there's a lot of deep roots, conservative roots in the Black church. But it also lacks change, and it's slow to change. And so males have dominated pastoral leadership in the Black church, but women are the majority and who serve the most and who do the most leg work and the footwork. And so I started thinking about this. If males are, the main leadership dominance, but women are the majority, how can more women be leaders in pastoral roles? And so I thought about Marian Wright Edelman's quote that says, "You can't be what you can't see." And so it really talks about the having women in places where young girls can see what they can be. And so why is this going on? Well, scriptural interpretation and theology, scripture has been used, as we know, in all contexts of religious life. Scripture has been used to explain and justify the actions against female leadership in churches. There's been a lack of knowledge, there's been misinterpretation of scripture, and narratives because of the conservative theology. So current events which have highlighted current sexism in the Black church have happened as well. And so I share a few current events that have happened. Recently there's a Black woman who applied for a position at a pretty prominent Black church in the Northeast. And she was denied a continuance in the process because it came out, even though she was very, very much, qualified. But as things went on, there came out some things of sexism and discrimination as in the process of applying for a church as a senior leader. So I share a little bit about those current events and some others that have happened in the Black church recently. And so Vashti McKenzie, who is the first female bishop in the African American Methodist Episcopal Church, it says in many years of the inspection of Black church, it was quick to address sexism and poverty, but slow. I mean, not sexism, racism and poverty, but slow to address sexism. I am sorry that I did not review my slides first. Sorry about that. I think I missed a couple things. So she really talks about this from a perspective of a woman who was the first in her context. And then what ought to be going on. I love what We Young was beginning to talk about, and that's really addressed a lot in my book, is about the Imago Dei. And if we were created in the image of God, seeing and honoring the person they are created to be. So Reverend Jill Olds from the Yale Youth Institute has a conversation with two Black women who are in ministry, and they really start talking about how us being created in God, and what how we can be honored in all of our creation and be used. And then Sharon Ketchum from the Reciprocal Church says, seeing a young person's potential is also bound in humanity's reflection of the Imago Dei of God. So youth pastors and other church leaders have the opportunity to begin seeing and viewing God in young Black girls, and how God will reflect God's image through them. Denying a woman, sorry, dealing with my little one, denying a woman or a girl the opportunity and acknowledging that they can't lead in a specific way in a church is also denying the full image of God that they bring as a creation of the one who created them. So what's next? How can youth ministry take the lead in this effort? I think intentional mentoring of Black girls with men who are leaders in the church, and senior pastors, and women. I think both will bring a great impact on young girls. More leadership opportunities afforded to Black girls, instead of always picking Black males to be leaders, which sometimes tends to happen in Black church settings. And then allowing girls to create their own narrative and spiritual leadership through exploring their own faith journey. I wanted to end with this, and this was by Janara Lee, recognized as the first Black woman preacher in the AME church in 1819. She says, if the man may preach because the Savior died for him, why not the woman? Seeing he died for her also, is he not a whole Savior instead of a half one? So I asked the question in light of this quote, how can young Black girls understand the history of this struggle and ask questions in the church or in youth ministry about their own spiritual journey and struggle of leadership in today's society? So
Wow.
that's
wow,
what I
wow.
have.
Yeah. Thank you.
And I hope very helpful. Yeah. Let me stop sharing here.
First of all, the fact that you got through that with a toddler in your
I
arms.
know. I'm so sorry.
No.
My
Don't be
husband
sorry. No need
here,
to be
It's all
sorry
good.
at all.
I'm struggling this evening.
Yeah, just props to you for being able to do that. Absolutely. And then such good words. That last slide will preach all day long. So yeah, I love it. And yeah, what would you all say to Bianca? What would you like to ask her?
I really like.
Oh no, go ahead, Kelsey. Go ahead.
I love this. I love it. I love this. So I am in the only area in the ELCA that has their first African-American woman called to be a bishop. So the first slide I was already connecting with, I feel it. Our bishop has done one term and she says, I'm out. This was a great gig, but it is hard work to try to pave a path that no one, that really you're like lifted up for, right? You're there because you're now the first African-American woman called. So how do you actually do the work that needs to be done while people are just seeing you there as just a placemaker? Look, we've done it, right? And so I love this. I think it's really important. I also wonder how we can support young women, African American young women, in this process so that they don't feel exhausted by this work, right? How can other people support them so that they aren't exhausted and like quit after a little bit and like it's too much?
Yeah. No, thanks for that.
Yeah, I mean that's excellent. And I think it's just knowledge and understanding the struggle, and understanding that it is still an anomaly for sometimes women of color to be a solo pastor, senior pastor, and so recognizing the landscape that is there. Um, but then as youth workers, as youth pastors and youth leaders, reaching back to those women of color, young women of color, and showing them that they can be that, and address showing them through history and talking to them about what they can be and giving them examples as well. So yeah, just doing the work together.
Yes, yes.
I love what you said about you cannot be what you cannot see. So the modeling piece, like in representation, is so important. And I'm thinking like in terms of evangelism, like having a variety of students, not just one particular student or one type of story, the sob story or whatever. Have different people from different backgrounds share how they came to know Christ and all of that. I'm wondering like how can you create dialogue? Because what I've found is like whenever you talk about racism, and I remember even in our intensive, when you thanked us at the end, like, hey, I felt very open to talk about my experiences and all of that. Like, how can we have that in churches where people are open to talk about things like racism and experiences like that without feeling like it's going to be like a back and forth and who wins the argument and nothing productive comes from it.
Yeah, I think it's not being afraid of the conversation. And that's some of what I talk about a little bit is about the fear that, that has created sexism in the church as well. And I talk about, having males be the ones that actually speak up and speak on this, and not just women, but just in general, just not having fear to have conversations, because race is it's inevitable and it's real, and we gotta not be afraid to talk through it, and just have an open conversation. So
all right, we do need to go on, so keep those comments and questions coming in if you want to do that in chat. The next person is Will is up. Take it away.
Okay, let me share my screen. Do this. I'll set my timer. I know we're a little behind. So yeah, I was drawn to this idea of stories and testimonies, right? How can stories and testimonies be used to help teens, help youth, and informing their identities in Christ. And I came upon this idea of narrative identity. There's a citation there, but I'll just go ahead and read it. An individual's identity can be formed by a reconstruction of episodic memories. And McAdams and McLean, they talk about how these memories, these snippets, are kind of synthesized in this coherent account of life events. And this account, this complete account, comprehensive account, provides unity, purpose, and meaning for an individual. I came across this idea of breaking up the theory of narrative identity into three different parts or three different levels of influences or factors, and this is by Granick, Morita, and Schulten. They divide it up into intrapersonal, interpersonal, and cultural. And I thought this might be a way to kind of provide a framework in how ministries and churches can actually help teens to develop this narrative identity in Christ. So at the interpersonal level, they divide it up into three different parts as well. So you have communal, agency, and coherence.
Communal is, what are the types of relationships that youth are connected to? These are relationships that help them to develop their sense of self. And as they are connecting with people and relationships that help them develop the sense of self, it leads to agency. So within these relationships, they are developing the sense of self, and they are also making assertions of their selves, of this identity. And how they do that is they make decisions, they make commitments as they're sharing their stories, as their stories are being talked about or evaluated by these relationships, by the people in these relationships. Then they kind of form and reform their narratives, and that's where coherence comes in. So as they are sharing their stories, as their stories are kind of being reworked in their own minds based on how people are receiving their stories, based on some of this feedback, that's how they begin to kind of solidify their stories, right? Making them more, I'm losing my words here, making them more real for themselves in terms of their identity. So in terms of the intrapersonal level, I write about how churches and ministries can actually become involved in this, right? So at the communal level, where we have these relationships that the youth are connected to, we have mentors and disciplers, right? Can we have mentorship and discipleship relationships that we connect the youth to? And these people are more mature Christians. They're more further along in their faith. They're committed storytellers and listeners. So in this way, because they're further along in their faith, because they're mentors and disciplers, they can actually help the youth in terms of the exercising their agency, all right? As they are sharing, these mentors and disciplers can help them to process some of these life events that the youth are sharing, helping them to recognize Christ in these events that they're sharing, and that leads to further coherence in terms of this Christ-centered narrative identity. These mentors and disciplers can help them, as Ruth says, help them to recognize the intersection of the divine in these finite moments of human experience. So as they are reliving and remembering, as Jury says, some of these life events, these mentors and disciplers can help them to recognize these God moments in their stories. So as this happens at the individual level, we get to the interpersonal level where you have more and more people involved in helping teens and adolescents develop this narrative identity. So the first level at the first part of the interpersonal level is elaboration, knowing how to ask good questions, probing and evaluative questions. So this helps the youth to articulate the stories, that helps them to recognize the key components in this kind of narrative, as they kind of form the coherence, as they begin to form this complete story. And in terms of elaboration, you need attentive listeners, people who are willing to be positive in terms of how they listen to the youth stories, and they need to be willing to invest the time and also to show the interest as they're listening to the stories, so that the youth feel like they have this connection in this person who's willing to help them to elaborate, and also helping them to form and reform these Christ stories. And there's another part of interpersonal connections, grappling contradiction. And I think this part of it is really cool. Wrestling with commitments. Youth need a safe space to wrestle with the contradictions that they are beginning to experience in terms of values that they're committing to, or values that they're making a decision for, and how these might actually begin to contradict to some of their preconceived notions or some of the larger narratives that they're experiencing in terms of narrative identity. So again, how can maybe churches and ministries get involved in these three areas? So in terms of elaboration, can we train leaders? Can we have workshops? Can we actually be intentional about teaching people how to ask good questions, so that they have a role to play, and the questions that they're asking really help the youth to form a good way for them to articulate their stories, so that they continue to form this narrative identity in Christ. In terms of attentive listeners, how can churches and ministries continue to cast vision that all of us have a role to play, even if we're not directly mentoring or discipling these teens as they're sharing their stories and developing their narrative identities. We all have a role to play in just showing basic interest, being willing to listen to their stories. I think in a lot of cases, maybe we have to cast this vision and really be intentional about teaching people, hey, this is an important thing that you can do in terms of showing positivity, to be willing to invest 5-10 minutes of your time on a Friday night or a Sunday and just listening to teens, showing basic interest. Hey, can you tell me your story? I think sometimes people need to be almost taught that or be reminded that that's a very basic thing that they can do to contribute to these teens within the life of the church. And grappling contradictions, can churches and ministries create really safe spaces where teens can ask questions, teens can process some of these tensions that they're feeling between their developing narrative identities and some of these other narratives that they might be experiencing, even in church or even outside of church, in their spheres of engagement and spheres of influence. Um, Being willing, teaching people to be willing to accept the ministry, the mystery, right? And just ministry of presence, not feeling like we always have to provide an answer for teens as they're asking questions, and just being willing to listen and just being willing to be an additional presence as they're wrestling with these contradictions and questions and saying, hey, I don't have all the answers, but let's just keep asking these questions. Let's keep exploring together so that this is another way that teens can feel safe as they're developing these narrative identities in Christ. And the third level is this kind of cultural level. You have person-society integration, where as teens are developing their narrative identities, they're forming commitments, and they're if there are consistencies with culture, then they're like, okay, my narrative identity is cool. My narrative identity is becoming more complete because I see these consistencies with what is culturally acceptable. That's where we get to this master narratives. What are shared stories, values, and beliefs that they are sharing with people around them? And if there are these consistencies, then they go, hey, this is great. Of course, if they feel like there are inconsistencies with the master narratives, then they might begin to form alternative narratives. They might find and seek out people who share like-minded values or share similar goals as those things come out in the stories that they're sharing with each other. So how can ministries and churches get involved in these three areas and use this as a framework to help teens? In terms of the person-society integration, I write about how this is really a lifelong process, that this is a continual process, that this points to the need of discipleship relationships. As teens, they get into young adulthood, continue to develop these narrative identities, they will need that voice. They will need that person who continues to listen. They will need that person who continues to help them to process what are those God moments in the stories that they share, and to help them to continue to form this narrative identity in Christ. In terms of master narratives, I wonder about how perhaps within ministries and churches, that the Christ-centered narrative, the redemptive narrative, that should be the master narrative. Or how can we present that as the master narrative for these teens, that they don't feel like their Christ-centered identity is the alternative narrative in culture, but actually the redemptive narrative should be the master narrative for them? And how do ministries repeat that? They help teens relive that through continuous sharing of stories. What are some ways that we can help teens to remember that, reminders in the church? And in terms of alternative narratives, what are some spaces that safe spaces that churches can continue to create for them as they wrestle with some of these things? And again, it points back to the training of quality listeners. How can we train people and to be really intentional about helping teens to wrestle with some of these things? So in terms of narrative identity in Christ, how can we continue to use the practice of short story sharing and sharing the testimonies so that the community of believers is a place where we can actually help teens to realize their Christ-centered narrative identities through these Christ-centered stories, so that through this process, maybe we can help teens to discover their sense of identity, belonging, and purpose in Christ. 11:37, almost made it, but yep, and that's me.
Yeah, thanks, Will. Impressed with the slide making skills.
Canva, man, it's all Canva, man. Canva makes anything good.
Well, good job on that. And then, yeah, I mean, just the thing that stood out to me was creating those safe spaces,
Yeah.
and then also training adults in how to really listen and listen well. Those are two things that I think most churches find difficulty in developing. So yeah, well done. What would you all say to Will?
I like your breakdown of how the church can and should be involved in each of those steps, right? It's not just part 3 of 4, but it's all parts of those and how we can work together for it. I wonder how, especially like you teach listening and you do these workshops with knowing your context, generations and cultures that are different and don't respect listening, right? So not even like teaching listening, but teaching that listening is something you need to respect.
Yeah.
That's a challenge I see.
No, it's good. That'll be for the next paper, I guess.
Yeah, that was one of my wonderings too, is like, yeah, how do you ensure that people are going to listen in order to like hear and empathize with, rather than listening in order to like earn the right to say something, you know, like, hey, this has been burning in my spirit to say to you for the longest time, or I'm coming in with this idea of things that I need to say to you, so I'm going to listen to you in order so that I can feel like I've earned your respect to get that out. That was just something I was wondering about.
No, man, that's like a whole nother paper, man. Just how to listen. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
That's this spring.
That's a spring. Oh, there you go. Independence.
There you go. Maybe one more comment.
Hey, Will, we should combine our papers.
Oh yeah, sure. I know. I know. Stephen, Andy mentioned a bunch of you guys are doing storytelling, and life gets in the way.
Yeah,
And
so I reckon it's really amazing how hang on. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
So I was just saying that I love that your focus on attentive listening and just how practical that you've made it. So I guess the question is whether we can create I guess more informal spaces, you know, for just the exchange of stories between generations.
Yeah.
Okay, folks, we have been going at it a good amount of time. It's time to take a break. It is 20 to the top of the hour. How about can we cut it to 10-minute break? Can we do that? Come back at 10 till? All right, we will see you then.
Read. I'm not alone in this. There are plenty of people who have tried to read the Bible and gave up because they didn't have good resources to help them study it. Our teens don't know how to apply what they're reading in the Bible because they need help connecting the Bible story to their everyday life stories. Many parents aren't passing on biblical basics to their kids because they can't. They don't know how to study it. And a lot of church and ministry leaders teach topically to address what's happening in our culture, and most small group curriculums do the same. People are getting biblical content, but a lot of times it's taken out of context. Some people think that studying the Bible is boring, but I think maybe just the way we're doing it is boring. People love stories. We watch television, read books, listen to podcasts, and ask each other about our days. What if teaching the Bible through narrative is the key to biblical literacy? I mean, that's the way Jesus taught. So let me tell you a story. In the bustling town of Wisdomville, the schools were renowned for teaching knowledge, and from that knowledge came valuable life skills. Students flocked to the schools to gain the life skills because they made their lives better. It made all of Wisdomville better. So teachers responded to the demand and shifted their focus entirely to teaching life skills, expecting parents to fill the gap and teach knowledge at home. After all, parents have always been responsible for teaching their kids knowledge. But the teachers had been teaching knowledge so well for so long that parents hadn't had to teach it. Eventually, parents forgot how to teach their kids knowledge, so knowledge lessons became neglected. People thought learning knowledge was boring anyway. Skipping straight to life skills seemed way more beneficial. Over the years, more and more students flooded the schools to gain practical life skills, leaving behind knowledge altogether. Life skills flourished, yet knowledge dwindled. As the generations passed, there was no one left with knowledge, and without knowledge, life skills lost their significance. For knowledge was the root from which life skills blossomed. What happened in Wisdomville is similar to what's happening in the United States. 67% of practicing Christian teenagers either rarely read the Bible or never read it at all. A practicing Christian is someone who identifies as a Christian, states their faith is important to them, and attends church at least once a month, either online or in person. So Bible use isn't even considered a defining characteristic of a practicing Christian in the United States. A Bible user is someone who independently interacts with the Bible outside of church at least 3 times a year. Only 3 times a year. There are no universal standards for biblical literacy, but there is metric for scripture engagement. That includes frequency of Bible use, the impact scripture has on a person's relationship with God and others, and its essentiality to their daily decision-making. Based on those metrics, only 10% of Gen Z engages with scripture. If we presume that scripture engagement is a prerequisite for biblical literacy, the research strongly suggests that over 90% of practicing Christian teenagers in America are biblically illiterate, and that number is on the rise. To make matters worse, research shows that 70% of Protestant teenagers who attended church regularly in high school left the church by the time they were 23, and most of them never returned. Most of the reasons young people give for leaving the church are rooted in biblical literacy. Essentially, they don't understand the Bible and how it applies to their lives, so they just give up. Biblically, parents are responsible for discipling their children, but they don't feel equipped, so they outsource the responsibility to the church. More and more churches are adopting an attractional model so they can reach more people. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with attractional models, but churches that operate this way tend to give introductory topical messages for new believers rather than deeper expository messages to guide the congregation forwards towards biblical literacy. They encourage their members to attend small groups and Bible studies, but a lot of these group lessons end up being more like devotional reflections. On the other side of attractional models are outdated teaching methods that don't address real life issues or consider the different backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives of their audiences. And this causes disinterest and skepticism. So people are either learning to live biblically without biblical knowledge or getting biblical knowledge without knowing how to apply it. Parents can only teach what they know, which means that we're becoming more biblically illiterate with each generation. We need a new approach. And a narrative approach to teaching the Bible may be the relevant and engaging method that people need. The art of oral storytelling dates back to the beginning of time, and several books of the Bible were predominantly narrative. Plus, Jesus used parables as his preferred teaching method. What if we teach like Jesus? Stories capture the interest of their audience and get them thinking. Stories engage the listener through context and relevance so that they pay closer attention. Using a narrative approach when teaching the Bible allows people to better connect with the message, engage with it, and retain its information. The more Christian adults know and understand about the Bible, the better equipped they are to teach teens, which inevitably would increase biblical literacy in the United States across multiple generations. When pastors use a narrative approach to explore the Bible from different perspectives and experiences, they can reach a wider audience. A narrative approach doesn't just help people gain biblical knowledge, it helps them understand how to apply it to their lives. It makes it relatable and impactful for everyone. Getting started is easy. Start by incorporating peer testimony and witness into ministry program. You can also incorporate peer teaching. It's one of the most effective ways to help teens gain the skills needed to become biblically literate. Taking on the responsibility of teaching a Bible story requires teens to critically engage with the Bible. It also gets them asking questions and connecting with adults who can help them find resources, answer their questions, and help them get a better understanding of the story. In order to craft the story in their own words, they have to know the characters of the story and how they interact with each other. They need to be able to describe the characters, know their needs, motives, and goals, and what obstacles get in their way. They need to know the plot and how it unfolds. The trick, though, is that storytelling must be captivating for it to be impactful to the audience, and that takes guidance and practice. You probably have way too many youth in your ministry to get them all peer teaching with narrative approach at church, but you can always encourage them to share biblical narratives at home, and there's some pretty creative ways to do that. One of the ways they can do this is through the use of technology and interactive resources like YouTube, TikTok, or Minecraft. For example, they can retell Bible stories in 60 seconds on TikTok like Live. If they like Minecraft, they can use it to recreate Bible stories and narrate them to post on YouTube like Zellistic. They can even use stop motion and Legos to recreate Bible stories like Bricktime Studios. When teens are using narrative at home like this, parents have a chance to walk through the Bible with their teen and help them craft their stories. It inspires conversations about scripture, historical context, characters, and how to critically engage with the story so they can understand it better and know how to apply it to their life. Those are the essential steps to becoming biblically literate. And when they know what the Bible says and how to follow what it commands, they'll be able to teach others to do the same. Like I mentioned earlier, there are no universal standards for biblical literacy, but for the sake of my paper, I used the criteria that a group of English teachers came up with. I think these criteria can help us know what to focus on while teaching, but it doesn't really give us metrics on how to gauge if our teaching methods are effective or not. For example, they need to be familiar with common Bible stories, but which ones and how many? There's also limited research on the effectiveness of narrative approach on teaching the Bible. So if we try it, we need to keep track of its success and failures. I hope this presentation has been helpful, and I'm looking forward to hearing all about how narrative approach is helping your teens become more biblically literate. Thanks for listening.
Wow, wow, wow. She she swung for the fences and hit a home run.
Okay, thanks, because I was worried it was going to be too childish.
No, wow.
Okay.
Impressive computer skills.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Such a creative way to tell the story of what you're trying to accomplish through that, and the narrative approach. I mean, we've many of us have talked about the narrative approach, right? I mean, the telling stories and such an important part of the way that we learn, and that really would be helpful. Those are interesting facts that you shared about biblical literacy, and what it takes. I love the one with that 3 times a year is what it takes to have read the Bible, or that you're considered to read the Bible outside the church. Wow. Yeah. Wow. So yeah, well done. Thanks for sharing that with us. Yeah, I wish, I wonder.
Man. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kelsey. No? Okay.
I like that I didn't go first.
Oh, okay. Man, that was effing awesome. When you're willing and ready, can I share that with people? Like, I yeah, I loved every part of it. The part I wonder about is, at least thinking about my own context, how will parents receive the part where you do talk about their responsibility in basically helping their children to be biblically literate? I wonder how much more work that's going to take for us to really cast that vision for parents and adults at home, especially if they have outsourced this to ministries and youth pastors and churches, right? Yeah, I do wonder about that. That it's such an uphill battle, I feel like. But this is such a great start, and yeah, if you're willing and when you're ready, like I would love to share this with even just like my team and just people, leaders at my church, just to get the conversation started, right? Just to get them thinking like, oh, there are things I can do at home. I don't need a seminary degree to walk my kids through just being biblically literate, right? Like I don't need to do Bible studies all the time, right? Let's just tell these stories, right? I mean, I think it was awesome. It was really good, man. Yeah.
I feel technology illiterate now after watching that, specifically with the floating head. Kudos to you. Thea loved it. My daughter was a fan. But in terms of that as well, right? I've created YouTube videos for our church. COVID brought a lot of new capabilities in my technological realm of things. And kids are very adept at that, right? Youth are very adept at using that technology, but how do we get parents to engage in it so that when youth use it to tell the stories, they do it in a way that reflects the Bible instead of what they want it to say? You know what I mean? Especially since parents are afraid of technology sometimes, and like, how can those all communicate together is what I wonder.
It's a good thought. Thank you.
I think that was awesome, Vanessa. Thank you. I just need to know if AI crushed your images for you. And like, okay, yeah. I recognize them. That's awesome. Way to go. And then I'm wondering, is there any room in your narrative approach to talk about the way the Bible was put together? Like, is the goal to have trust in the words that are on the page, as well as how to apply it? I don't know if is there room?
I think there is, and that's a really good point. Yes, I have half a page left. I got
No,
that.
you don't have to add it, but just have it, for future papers.
Great job, Vanessa. I think I'm also glad you didn't go before me. I think the only thought I have is similar to mentoring and listening. The motivation, how do we create a way for members to buy into that? It's not something I'm just putting on you. That's a common theme that I'm listening for my own topic, as well as storytelling and listening. But you nudged it so far ahead that I feel like there's some momentum there that's going to help all of us in trying to figure out how do we implement in a small scale even these kind of great ideas. Thank you so much. And I was thinking AI too. I was like, oh, those are AI pictures.
Yeah.
That's so good. All right, we do need to keep moving. So, man, thank you. Chris, you are up.
All right. Let me share my screen a second. All right. So my paper and topic are on kind of had these three questions at the beginning of the year around identity, belonging, and purpose, and mine very much falls in the category of identity. And so the topic that I wanted to talk about was something that I've been wrestling with for the past couple of years as I've been working with students going through COVID and the rise in social media fitness influence. So it's about muscle dysmorphia, steroid usage, young adults, and a theology of the body. So background, this is deeply personal for me. I remember when I was in 9th grade and walking into a freshman guy's locker room for the first time and becoming very aware that I did not look like everyone else that was in there, and everyone else was vastly more quote unquote fit than I was. At the same time, I did youth ministry out in Chicago for a while, and I remember we were on a discipleship trip. This was 2 years ago, and walking into a bathroom at one of the campgrounds, and some young men in there flexing and posing and talking about how the lighting was crappy in here and how their bulk wasn't going so good, and using all of these sorts of words that kind of brought back a lot of those memories of how I felt when I was in 9th grade, wrestling with not feeling comfortable in my own skin. And so this is an ongoing discovery for me as well. So what's going on? Hold on, I have to get rid of all of your faces because you're right in the way of. Oh, how do I get rid of you all? You're like right in the way of my slide. All right, we'll just go for it. So what's going on? There has been a rise in muscle dysmorphia in teenage and young adult men over the past decade or so. Muscle dysmorphia, if you don't know what it is it's a subcategory of body dysmorphia. Body dysmorphia is kind of just feeling out of sorts in your body, not loving the way your face is shaped, or the fact that you don't have any hair, or whatever it may be. Muscle dysmorphia is a little bit more targeted than that, feeling like you have a preoccupation with the lack of muscularity that you have, or a lack of leanness, having a preoccupation with those sorts of things. At the same time, there has been a rise in, to try and cope with that, a rise in anabolic androgen steroid use amongst young adult and young teenage men as well, trying to use them to cope with the fact that they might not look or feel the way that they expect that they are supposed to look or feel as young men. So some statistics for you. 70.2% is the percentage of a study of 2,269 men surveyed from the ages of roughly 16 to 30 that view physical fitness influencers anywhere from often, which would be about, they would say about 50% of the videos you watch, to always, where it's nearly 100% of the videos that you watch online are related to physical fitness male influencers in some way. 20, this is the percentage of young men that experience a dissatisfaction with the amount of muscle or the amount of leanness that they have, to the point of obsession in that same study, talking about that. And 22 is the average age at which a young man, it was roughly about 7 to 9%, depending on the studies you would look at, between the ages of 16 and 30. 22 was the average, 22 is the average age in which somebody would begin the use of steroids for the first time to kind of counteract the fact that they don't feel how they were. The reasons for this is because they're not in their parents' home anymore. They're not in a college dorm. They're kind of out on their own for the first time and feel like they can explore without any sort of repercussions for it. So why is it going on? There's been a changing of male body ideals, and that's escalated since the early 1900s, that has changed every couple of decades. Whereas before, there was not really, as far as what studies can show, it was maybe every like 500 years, there was a change in what the ideal man would look like. And so there's also been a rise of marketing. This has really escalated since the 80s, at the rise of like muscle magazines and different sorts of athletic magazines, and especially over the past 5 to 10 years in the rise of the social media and influencer marketing world that we currently live in. So over the years, the male body image has changed significantly. In the early 1900s, we swung the pendulum one way, where there were things called fat men's clubs, where you had to be over 200 pounds, you had to have a wide waist. It was kind of seen as this form of affluence in the midst of the Industrial Revolution. It meant that you didn't have to work, you were well put together, you had influence and stature in society. Those gave way as in-home scales took over, and everyone realized that they were probably lying about their weight. And that it was actually really unhealthy. Insurance companies and doctors were starting to come out and say, hey, this isn't a healthy way for you to live your life. They saw that those individuals were had a higher mortality rate than those that didn't carry as much weight. And so in the 1920s, you have the handsome Marlon Brando that kind of became the golden era of Hollywood. That was kind of what the typical man looked like. Like if you didn't overeat or undereat, like that's probably what you would look like. It didn't take a lot of work to look like that. In the 1960s, you had more of the countercultural slender look, which had little to no muscle tone, trim waist and slender chest was kind of the look. Think of Mick Jagger, think of Jimi Hendrix, think of David Bowie, sorts of things. But in the 1980s, this is when you really start to see, and statistics would show, a rise in the amount of young men and individuals that would start to experience muscle dysmorphia in some way, shape, or form, because the people that were on the screen were starting to become bodybuilders now turned actors. So you have people like Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger. You also have, at the same time, because these were such unattainable ways of living, you kind of have steroids moving out from the bodybuilder and sports world into the average Joe world there. And that was becoming more and more prominent. It then shifted again in the 1990s to more of the Brad Pitt Fight Club look. It was a little bit more slender, David Beckham, some of those sorts of people. Still focused on aesthetic and athletic, but just not as overly muscled. In the early 1990s, there was also an act that was put out by Congress that outlawed many of the steroids and made them a controlled substance that you could get in serious trouble for if you were found in possession. Or so a lot of those went underground. Everyone started lying about using steroids until about 2020 or so. There was a huge movement and influx of social media influencers that found their way into young adult and teenage algorithms on TikTok and Instagram and basically any social media, YouTube. By the likes of the guy on the screen there. His name is Chris Bumstead. He's an Olympia athlete, but he's not the overly muscled, like massive individuals. This is something that has become in vogue for young men to aspire to. He has like 5 million followers, of which many of them are teenage boys that think this is what they should be capable of looking like and have bought into that this is who they should be and what the ideal man looks like. And so what's ought to be going on with this? What I forgot to say is many of the social media influencers now are becoming more open about their steroid use and that it shouldn't be seen as a bad thing in order to attain the body that you want. That if done correctly, if followed by the guidelines of a medical professional, you will be fine. That's kind of what's being told to young men now. We have to start developing a robust theology of the body. Understanding that the body is an important creation of God is a helpful starting point. The theology of a body is a call for all not to become more spiritual, but to become more incarnational and in tune with our bodies. The scriptures are full of stories. What I love about the book of Genesis is at the end of Genesis chapter 2, it says Adam and Eve were naked and felt no shame. And then in Genesis chapter 3, verse 7, is where it's shortly after they eat the fruit and they become one of the first things that they feel is shame around their nakedness. And so this idea of feeling out of our bodies, out of not in love with who we are is not anything new. And so what's really cool about this story, this is a side thing, but what's really cool about this story is there's 2 Hebrew words used for the coverings that are made. The first one is when Adam and Eve make their coverings, and it's this sort of idea of it was flung together. It was not really covering them in any way, shape, or form. It was not going to help them hide the shame that they felt around their nakedness. But the second Hebrew word is when God makes the coverings for them. And what's really interesting about this and why I think developing a robust theology of the body is important is because from the very beginning, around the nakedness that we feel, both the physical and the shame that we have around that, God created, and the word that's used there for the garments are these more all-covering garments. It was God entering in to help them feel or to feel less shame and to feel better about who they were. God was entering into their shame to help them do something about it. And so through developing a robust theology of the body, we're helping individuals meet God in the midst of their shame or in the midst of their discomfort with who they are. The other thing that we can do is explore and navigate this with individuals. We can practice presence and exploring what it means to wrestle with what we are experiencing. And there's some examples to follow. Deeper connection with the scripture. This is where we talk about Adam and Eve a little bit. I can't see because you guys are all in the way. What does my next slide say there? Could somebody read the top one to me and I'll go from there?
Practicing empathy.
Practicing empathy. There we go. So practicing empathy, one of the worst things that we can do, and one of the worst things that was found in a lot of studies is heaping more shame on individuals when it is found out that they wrestle with this, or they have unhealthy eating habits, or are participating in and taking androgenic steroids. So practicing empathy, entering in, being curious, asking questions. What we don't see is God shaming individuals right away in the garden. What we see is him getting curious and asking the question, well, who told you that you were naked, right? Like it was that sort of question that God entered in with a curiosity, practicing empathy for the individuals. Understand who they are following, asking and being curious about who these individuals are following them as well to understand the influences and individuals that are influencing our students, and share your story. I think many of us have stories of feeling uncomfortable in our own skin. Like I regularly will talk to teenagers in the gym and just ask them like why they're there. And a majority of them are not there for getting bigger or stronger for sports. It's mostly for aesthetic purposes. And I've had the opportunity already to share like, yeah, I experienced that alongside with you, and I'm 33 years old, you know, and like having conversations with students in the gym has been really cool with that. And so I think we all have experiences of feeling out of sorts with who we are or how we look or whatever it is, and sharing our stories and being vulnerable. A lot of the testimony stuff we talked about can be really powerful for students. So how might we respond? A couple things is doing some research around theology of the body. I have a couple resources on the next page I'll show you. But developing a teaching series and a small group series, because I think there's things from the theology of the body that can, while my paper was mostly around young adult men, I think there's a lot for young adult women that can learn from a theology of the body as well. But doing a teaching series or a small group series on the theology of the body for high school, middle school students to help them develop that. Potentially begin working out with a group of students who are showing interest in fitness, helping them have helpful guides through this instead of social media influencers becoming their main guides through the fitness world. Be in conversations with parents about what young men are facing, do research around this topic, learn some of the signs and symptoms of what could be pointing towards this, like do they have calorie counting apps? Is this all they talk about? Do they talk about bulking and cutting cycles? Do they show signs of steroid use, like not acne necessarily in their face, but all over the rest of their body? Are they gaining weight rapidly? Like all of these sorts of things. Being in conversations with parents is something not a ton of parents know about currently. And then the last one is kind of like a pie in the sky sort of dream, is developing an app for tracking fitness that is also a devotional app for students that primarily focuses around helping students have a healthier view of who they are before they start entering into a gym setting. Because most of the time we enter in trying to think about what are we trying to make look better? What are we trying to grow? Like all of these sorts of things. And how do we recenter ourselves on who God has called us to be in all of our uniqueness all at the same time. Couple helpful resources if you want to learn more about this. The Adonis Complex is a book written in 2000. It's a little bit outdated now, but I think the premise of it is really helpful. They talk about how to identify, treat, and prevent body obsession in men and boys. Much of what they talk about hasn't changed. It's just some of the statistics have, but it's kind of become the pinnacle of research for them. And then the last one is about theology of the body, is what God says about our bodies. How the gospel is good news for our physical lives. It talks about the created body, the broken body, and the redeemed body, and how that can be helpful for individuals that are trying to develop a theology of the body that's helpful for them. So there we go. That's what I got.
Chris,
all right.
Thank
Stop the
you.
share.
Well done.
go.
Well done. Yeah, I mean, it's something that we see in teenagers all the time, and guys and girls, but specifically with guys for sure. So thanks for exploring that and really helping us to have a better understanding of it. Yes, team, jump in.
Yeah, Chris, thank you so much. You've enlightened me on an area that I've not been familiar with. I think this I've heard about and ministered to many alongside other female ministers to young ladies that have eating disorders and so forth, and the impact of social media and so forth. So this is very, very interesting for me. So I like how how practical your presentation is, and I'm sure your paper's the same. I love the idea of working out together. I mean, that's a great, boys often like to do things together rather than sit face to face having a coffee to do discipleship. So that's discipleship. That's awesome. And just the use of vulnerability in your own story. That's really, really powerful. I wonder how extensive this phenomenon is, whether it is global, whether it's more of a first world thing. Do you have any research about that as to how extensive this is globally?
Yeah, a lot of the research that I was working on was primarily out of the United States and Western Europe. There was some studies that I read from Australia as well, but
Yeah.
it was primarily, yeah, kind of like the those regions that this was coming out of.
Yeah, yeah. It'll be interesting to see how extensive this is across Asia as well. Whether it's there are differences between cultural environments or if it's just, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Great
that's
job, man.
helpful.
Yeah.
I feel so educated now, but also I can't believe I sat in ignorance so long, because I just think of all the things that you were talking about for boys. It's easy for me to see how girls are dealing with it, but as you were going through all the men, I was like, I don't think I've ever viewed it that way. Like, it was so outside of like my thinking and how I view men or how I expect them to see themselves. And my ministry is male heavy, and so I'm really looking forward to reading your paper and to giving it to my male leaders and getting our kids like really involved with Campus Life Fit, which I think kind of covers. I'm really emotional right now. That was so good. Good job.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to kind of piggyback over that, good job, by the way. Like, even as you were talking, and I'm thinking about recent comments that some of the male older high schoolers in my youth group make, right? Recently, they're talking a lot about like, hey, how much do you bench? How much do you bench? And even like, how much do you bench, Pastor Will? I'm like, I can bench you, right? And I think it's a joke, right? But then now as you're talking about your topic, I'm like, oh, I wonder if, or maybe it's something that they don't even realize themselves, right? Like what is this thing, this underlying thing that kind of occupies so much of how they think about themselves, right? But yeah, it's quite insightful. Definitely eye-opening for me. Yeah, good job, man.
Yeah, thanks, Kelsey, for that comment in chat. Yeah, that adds another layer for sure. But well, thanks, Chris. Such a interesting research uh, that you're doing, and can't wait to read more about that. So, well, to finish our time together in this group, the better group of the two, of course. um, Biak is going to clean up here and finish us up. So, Biak, time is yours.
Okay. Thank you. It's a long, more than 3 hours. I don't know if you can still concentrate. But yeah, I would like to order all of the books if those are public. I mean, if they are the books, they are really good discussion, and yeah, they are very interesting. I have a lot of joy inside myself, and yeah, thank you all of you for sharing, and that's I really enjoy. And yep, I'm not going to share very long, maybe under 7 minutes. My topic that I'm writing this time is losing young people in the church. So um, I'm looking my context in this the Chin Burmese, but I'm not naming it. But we have seen a lot of elementary, middle school. Uh, they feel like the church is irrelevant of their faith, or the church is irrelevant for every day of their life. So young people attendance in the church is dropping or declining. So there are many reasons, but in my context, our older people, the mindset toward the young people, and also the teaching style, it's really not working in the Chin Burmese churches. And some of our the older culture and the young people culture, there are huge gap in the Chin Burmese refugee or immigrant people in the because the old people they brought the culture from Burma. On some here, some of our children were born in refugee camp, Malaysia, Thailand, India, and some of them are born here. So we have a lot of we also have the cultural conflict within our own community. So that is one of the reason what is going on in the church and the reason that they left the church. And also here I would like to point out from according to Dr. Argue and Greenway, they say that why young people church attendance is in decline. Leader attempt to remain relevant typically fail to stem the tide, and this often lead them to shift their attention to blaming young people for leaving the faith, disbelieving in God, or becoming co-opted by the culture. So that is very much, it seems like it's speaking to me or it's speaking to us because many of our church leader or many of the older people, the elder in the church, are blaming our young people of not willing to attend the Bible study or Saturday night worship service or Sunday worship service. So they are blaming to those young people by the leader. So that turn into hatred toward the church or to the church leader. So young people need a culture of acceptance and be able to be themselves in accepting environments. So now they feel like they are not accepted in the church, or they feel like they don't belong to this church, this particular church. So young people are searching and looking for the meaning of life in every day of their life. They need help discovering, since we have been talking about their identity and belonging and purpose. That really, the world around them, that really need to make sense to them. So they really need help. But instead of helping, it seems like some of us are blaming them because we don't know the youth culture or the young people culture. So that is what is going on. That is happening. So instead, it seems like we need to help them to discover their identity, belonging, and purpose, so that they can see and find the meaning of life. So it's in Bonhoeffer books. It also talk about the second home, the church as a second home. So that's really I think that we also need in our community, so that those young people can feel at home with themselves, with others, in the world, and with God. So to create that a church as a second home, we need to offer hospitality to the young people. And also the church elder or the leader must be willing to let go of the power and open a room to discuss and to engage with the young people, helping them to feel at home and also opening the door for them to share what they want to be. The church is for them. Also, I think that hospitality is very much needed in our community. It's a sticky faith innovation. it said Christian hospitality is about how we make relational room for each other as God make room for us. So I think that we really need to make a room for each other, for our young people, as also God make a room for us. So the church can bring the church can engage and bring young people who no longer attend to the church, especially in the Chin Burmese churches, migrant churches. Young people are not interested in attending the church because the gap between the younger generation and the older generation is very huge, very big already. The cultural conflict. So I want the church leader to know that many of our service or our program, the teaching style and the mindset toward with younger generation are not relevant and not appealing to them, because this is not anymore Burma, or this is not anymore uh, not the older culture. It's the younger generation culture. So I want the older people in the church to refocus on hospitality to young people. So also bringing younger people into the ministry. I believe that by opening the door for younger ministry to younger people to join the ministry would really help them discover their identity, belonging, and also the purpose. To bring the new young people into the church, I think that that would really bring them back. These younger people who left the church or who thought the church as an optional. I think that if we do open the door for them to join the ministry, and if the church leader can listen more than lecturing, I think these young people will have a voice. And if they have if they have a ear that listen, I think these young people will come back to the church. So this is what I have today. Thank you, all of you.
Thanks, Bia. Yeah, that's as you were talking, my mind wandered to what role trauma has to play in the young people not engaging in the church, as being and really the trauma that the older members experienced in the longest running civil war that the world has ever known in Burma. And so yeah, I mean, so that's what my mind went to when you were talking about this, was just kind of the role of trauma in both the older generation and the young people. Trauma that they've experienced either directly with war or trauma of immigrating into a new country, not always by the easiest of ways. So thanks for sharing, and yeah, looking forward to reading more. Others?
I really like how you see the church having a call to action in this, right? I think it's important that we have a piece to welcome people. I wonder also, in response to trauma and also response to coming to this new space and this place and this world that they don't know, right? This country, how much they've experienced or haven't experienced hospitality, and if that is gonna come up against the church being hospitable, right? If they haven't experienced it in where they are currently living, will it really impact them in the church, or how can the church be impactful in that?
I like the aspect of hospitality as like a first step because it's not immediately telling them like ideas or theology or, you know, words at them. It's more of a like, hey, come enjoy being with us. I don't, I'm just curious what the image of hospitality is in Burma. I work with a lot of old white people, and so their hospitality is a potluck, and they are going to make you a casserole. It's going to be great. And so some young adults are like, I don't need to stick around after church, and I'm like, yeah, please, just eat it. So I don't know what the model of hospitality looks like in Burma, and so I'm excited to just learn more.
I like how you talked about the cultural issues between the generations, because I know in my local context, Hispanics, for example, the older generations who speak the language and know all the cultural customs and all that, whereas the teenagers, some of them speak the language, some of them don't, and so they have that struggle of connecting. In fact, there are some that I've heard of recently that they can't even speak to grandma because they didn't learn the language, but grandma only speak, or grandpa, they only speak the Spanish. So how to address the gap, not only from a religious perspective, but from that cultural aspect, so that they can have those meaningful conversations about faith and other things.
Yeah, that's really good. Thank you so much. Yeah, and yeah, as was here, the trauma and is firstly when when Burma got independent and when the military took power, the military is taking power, and so now it's taking place. So it has been under the military rule for 70 years. But the other problem is when other country like in Asian, they don't change the education system. So they follow the old British kind of education system. But Burma was changed totally into the education system was changed. So many of like 65% are not reading, and so that's also one of the problem in Burma. And trauma, and that has been really leaving behind the parents, leaving behind the sibling, and the village, the town. So, and also while you are fleeing illegally, living illegally in another country as a refugee, there is a lot of uh, fear, a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, to suffer mentally, physically, to are abused physically by, uh, and so the boss, or physically, mentally, spiritually. So it's kind of the healing taking place now here. But the other problem is if we wait too long, then we may not be able to lead these younger people into Christ, because while we are waiting too far for the healing, so the trauma, yeah. And so in this country, uh, everything we need to learn from the beginning, even driving and all those things, basics things. You are born with everything, but we need to begin everything with a basic thing. So there's also a challenge within the parents, within the older people itself. And the other problem is our younger generation did not see what we have experienced. So the cap is very high. So that's why sometimes there is a lot of conflict when we try to help them understand those things, but it's really difficult for them to understand it. Difficult because being born in this country, I mean, it's police are very helpful here, but in Burma, in Malaysia, in Thailand, police are kind of you are your enemy. They can take your money, they can put you in the jail, and so they are very corrupted. So the system and everything and it's very upside down. So yes, thank you. It will take so long. So
No, that's okay. Thank you, Biak. We appreciate you and your voice here. So, hey, the other group is finished, and so we can leave this room and head that way. And Steve will have the last few words, and we'll be done for tonight or today, wherever you are. So.